Welcome back. We're going to be continuing to configure our template and the settings in there for the colors and the menus and things like that. So we're just going to continue down the list here to the secondary menu. And I'm just going to click on this to see what they mean by a secondary window. And let's just click on this, open on hover, okay. And let's just save that, see what happens. So I'm just going to maximize this. Control F5. I don't know if we have a secondary menu set up here. Yeah, I don't see one. So it probably has to be something that we have to configure later on, and that's fine. So I'm just going to minimize that, click, and then drag it till it's over at the side. Done. Okay, I'm just going to turn this off. I don't think we need it. It sounds like it probably is more complicated than it really needs to be at this point for what we're doing. I think if you have a site that has a lot of content on it, you might need something like, say, a secondary menu. Okay, the next one, breadcrumbs. Breadcrumbs are the little they're little links on each page that help you with navigation. Let's see if I can find one. Okay, so I've managed to find a breadcrumb. I just kind of looked around to see where they would put it. Here's an example of a breadcrumb where it has home, and then underneath it, it's sort of categorically underneath accessories. This is a product. And so this is what's called a breadcrumb, and you can click on any one of those. The deeper you get categorically on any website with pages or blogs or products, this would grow, obviously. Just makes it easier to navigate for your customers. So that's what breadcrumbs are. So of course we want to leave that on there just because it keeps it simple. So okay, so breadcrumb style, it wants it to be a center. You can have it left. You can disable it. You can have it large. I think it automatically has already set quite nicely. Breadcrumbs background. Let's change that to see what happens. So we've been kind of doing green. I would say maybe, well, let's see what happens when we do gray. So let's change the spectrum here. So you can just play around with this as you can change the spectrums of gray and see what happens. Okay, let's save that. Oh, and it looks like how they show you an example here. So we're gonna see what happens. So that's this part here, and it looks like behind here is an image, this breadcrumb image. So it looks like just you can have any kind of image there, and it'll just overlay over top. So what it is this. There is a transparent part of it, and that transparent part you can see through. So they've made this cool little V design there. So you can play around with that and upload. You can change how this is. You can you don't even need to have an image. You can just have the breadcrumbs background, which obviously you don't necessarily want. So you can change it and do with whatever with what you want. And just play around with it. Like I said, that's how it all works to see what fits the best. And of course, I would definitely change that. I wouldn't leave this. It's very blatantly kind of in your face. So yeah, I would change that. And the way they had it was there was just a different variant of red in there. I can't remember what the color was. But just to make it look a little bit more complementary. There we go. All right, so just going down to the text color. This is the text color here. Obviously, when you do put backgrounds here, keep in mind the text color is very consistent on a lot of themes. So make sure that if you're picking a light text color, most of your backgrounds need to be dark. Now, just a little tidbit on some graphic design stuff is if there's a background you really like, but it's light and you have a white background, you can always use something like Photoshop and just ghost over a little bit of a dark overlay on it, just to darken it up a little bit, so that you can see your white text. So there's cool stuff you can do that way with images that might not work with light text or dark text, and vice versa. I personally, from a design perspective, I try my hardest to never use, like, straight white looks good, but I try my hardest not to use straight black. This is okay, but if you notice this text is a little bit on the gray side, that's kind of what we're going for, because black or dark text can be just it almost stands out too much, you know, so you got to be aware of that. And we'll get into text a little bit later on. So that's the color here, breadcrumbs text color. They give you two options. Okay, do you want a back to previous page button? I think if we saw that here, it was this one. So it just is a back button in your history where you were before. I leave it. That looks good. Padding. This is in pixels, okay? So you can change how much padding it is, and what'll happen is it'll push down or push up depending on how much padding you want from either side, okay? So there's margins and padding, and that's how that works. So just for demonstration purposes, I added 500 pixels of padding to the bottom, and you see how it really pushed it down far. It pushed the whole thing right down. So obviously you don't need to do that unless you really want to see some big picture in the background here to force a customer to have to scroll down to the product here, for instance. So I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to leave it default. Okay, but I did want to show how that works. So if I had top, it would push this down, and everything would be, this whole thing would come down further, and you'd have more room on the top. Okay, so that's how that works. Breadcrumbs. So we're going to start a little bit on the typography here, the font. So what you want to do is keep fonts consistent. So when you look at your mind map that you had made in the different pages, you want to look through the different types of styles that you want to be using for things like the title of pages, the paragraphs in things, and things of that nature. I would not go past maybe 2 fonts, max 3, but 2 is my recommended. 1 font being for things like titles, menu items, and things like that. If you do separate those, your menu might have a different font than your titles, and then all of the rest of your text has a different, has its own font. So 2 or 3 fonts max. And here's all the font family. So they've given you a huge list of fonts. A lot of these are coming from Google. How do I know that? Well, when I scroll down, I can see Google Web Fonts. This is actually quite popular in websites nowadays to have, and especially themes, to have web fonts automatically load in on drop downs like this. But all it is a name. How do you know what the font looks like? And so that poses a problem. And so here's all Google's, and then these are your default ones. If you use Comic Sans MS, please do not use this font for websites. In fact, as much as possible, you want to stay away from fonts that have serifs on them if you can. They're harder to read, and it's just not as good. Let me give you we're gonna jump over to Google Fonts right away here. So if you want to open up your browser, you can go to fonts.google.com, and you get to see them. Now, some fonts that have serifs look nice, and serifs are ticks that are on fonts, and I'm just trying to kind of look for one here. Let's see if we can find one. Yeah, here we go. These things are little ticks on the end. You know how they're sort of they've got some ticky lines on them. There's some that are really quite heavy with serifs, like this My Two Natures. It's just harder to read. Whereas a font that is more like this, where there is no serifs on them, are easier to read. So that's a good thing to keep in mind as you're going through your your fonts and picking a font that you want to use. So what I recommend doing is going through here and finding a font that you think really looks its stand out. And you have all kinds of different options here that you can choose thicknesses and slants and all kinds of stuff. And then from there, you choose the font that you want to have on your website. So for instance, this one here, this Roboto, right off the bat, it looks like a very clean font. Or just simply an open sans, okay? There's very little on the serifs a bit here. It's clean. So, but I'm gonna use this Roboto for now and see what that looks like. So I'm just gonna minimize this window, and I can select down here, and I can even type in this. There it is, Roboto. And they have different versions of it that you can use, condensed or mono, slab. Like we can look to see what it looks like. This is the weight or how thick the font is. And so you can see it's really thick. And I'm going to see what this looks like. So I'm going to save it. Okay. And I'm going to go Control F5. Okay. And we're going to see how that changed the breadcrumbs. So now we can see the font is a little different, and it's also changed the title here. And the capital letters on this font have serifs on it. So you might like it and just want to keep it, but you might not. There's other things you can do too before you moving on from this font, just to see what it does look like. They have some transformation settings here. So you could go to, say, all lowercase and save it. See what happens. We're going to click on this. Okay, and so it actually lowercased everything. Now that's trendy in some cases where there's no capitalization, but if you don't like it, then I suggest not to do that. So you can always change it back to the uppercase, or maybe just capitalizing just the letters, or choosing a different font altogether. So, which is what I'm going to do actually. I'm going to pick the Open Sans. Whoops. There. I know that one is definitely serif free. Okay, so I'm just going to refresh the screen after saving it. And there it is. Okay, might look similar to what they had before. And I could always change the font again. It's got a lot more options, this particular font. So I can thicken it up quite a bit to make it look a little bit more stronger, because it is a title. You want it to stand right out. I don't want to spend too much time on this. There we go. So it's nice and thick. Okay, so play around with that. Down here is the font size. Do you want to make it a little bit bigger? Do you want to make it smaller, or keep it default size? It's in pixels, little tiny dots on the screen. Same with line height. Line height is the spacing between fonts. If you increase the font size, you will have to increase the line height and play around with that. When we get into typography, you're going to see that, especially if you want to have your regular text, which is like this stuff, being a little bit more spaced out, especially when you've increased your font size. Here's the font color for this one. If you have a dark or light background, you want to change the font color depending, or just change it to a completely different color altogether. So if you're making a site that you're doing some complementary colors here, you don't have to go black or white on this. Again, you want to keep it obviously to your complementary colors. If you do have some background in here and it gets really busy, it's really difficult to see certain colors against certain backgrounds. So just keep that in mind, play around with it. Okay, return to previous page font. Again, we want to keep this very, very static. So if we're using the font family being, Open Sans as an example, then just continue with that. And you may change the weight a little bit, so maybe normal on that one, and no transformations. Okay, so there's an example. Okay, and it does give you, it's nice because it gives you a little bit of an example here, so you don't have to go to Google Fonts if you don't want to, but I think preemptively it's good to go there and pick out the fonts that you want to put. I'm going to be doing this whole site using Open Sans, to keep it nice and simple. Okay, so that is it for that portion. I'm just scrolling up to the top here, and we're just going to click on the footer. So we're done with the breadcrumbs. We're done with this section of the site. And they've given us lots of options to select different things for many different portions of the site as defaults. So the footer is the bottom of your page. That's where we're going to move on to next. This section here. So we're going to be setting some defaults like the colors and things like that for that. So let's get into that next. So footer columns. This is how many columns that you want on the bottom of your footer. When it's in a mobile state, it's just going to align like this, just straight down, because as I pull this in, let's see if I can open it up like that. If I pull it in like that, it's going to squish it in like it's on a phone, and it looks a little bit better when it's in a line like this. Okay, and so I'm just going to maximize, or not maximize, but have the screen so we can see. I'm going to leave a default 4 for now, but if you don't have a lot of stuff to put down here, you might want to just drop it down to 3 and only put what you feel is relevant. So maybe some store information, some menu items, as well as maybe could be a sign up page here to sign up for a newsletter, stuff like that. Okay, is the footer fixed? Well, we have that on, or sorry, off. I think that is follow footer. I'm not sure exactly what we want to do with that. I guess we can always test it, see what they mean by that. And then let's refresh it. Hopefully I saved it. Okay, so there we go. When I have scrolled all the way to the bottom, so it stays in place and it sort of covers over the footer until I fully scrolled down. As you can see how it does that. That's the fixed footer. Personally, I'm not a fan of that, so I'm going to turn that off. You might like that feature, or there could be a reason for that. Back to top button, that's this little icon here. A lot of websites have those. Great little feature, especially on a mobile phone. And you want to have it definitely on the mobile phone if you're going to do that. It just helps with people having to scroll on their phone. Any ease of usage on the user interface of your website, the better. All right, so we're done the footer part, and it doesn't look like they give us too many options there. A lot of that will be configured somewhere else on a subsequent video. The 404 page. The 404 page is the 404 is an error, means that the server couldn't find a particular page that you were looking for. And I'll show you an example of what that looks like. I'm just going to type in gibberish here. Hopefully it doesn't. There it is. So this is the, oops, I can't find the page. You might want to change the design of this page, and this gives you an option to do that. I always leave it default. They have some stuff that run in the background that make sure that things match color-wise. So I'm just going to leave it default. Okay, moving down to the next portion of this is Facebook login. So this will follow your Facebook and add some extra stuff. This I'm going to leave for a supplementary video on how to connect things with Facebooks and how to get this information so you can connect them. And some websites have things like allowing your Facebook feed to come directly on your website, or allow certain things to be interactable with Facebook. As for this particular site, I don't know yet what this is supposed to do, so we're going to probably run some tests to see what that is. And it could be just bringing in maybe some feeds, or just it's simply to connect better for share icons. Like for instance, on a page when it says share this or like this on Facebook, it connects to them directly. Share buttons. These are great. A lot of the times you see share buttons at the bottom. I don't know if we have them enabled in this view. Let's see if we have them enabled in the view, the bigger view. Here they are. This is probably them up here. The only way to tell is to disable them, right? So I'm going to disable it because it doesn't really explain where this stuff is. That's fine. Twitter's this little icon there. Okay, so it's not that. It's from somewhere else. So maybe it's on a product page, for instance. So I'm just going to go off the 404 page and see if we can't find it here. Maybe it's there. So I'm just going to refresh it. There, Twitter disappeared from here, this social icons here. So that's where it is, and it would be on probably pages and blogs and products and things like that. So that's what that is. So I would you keep as many as you want. If there's a particular social network you don't think is relevant for what you're doing, you can always uncheck it. Like LinkedIn, for instance. Why would somebody share products on toys on LinkedIn? You know, I don't know if somebody would do that. So I would click that one off as an example. Okay, and so there we go. Excellent. So that's the share button. And that concludes this section on the general settings of the theme. We're going to be moving next on to styling. This theme deactivation, obviously we don't want to deactivate the theme, so we're just going to leave that. We'll be moving on to styling, but before we go and style it, there's something that the theme didn't seem to cover, or at least I didn't find it, and that was that favicon that we talked about, the icon at the top. So I'm going to show you how to go do that the old-fashioned way in WordPress. So we're going to do that very next, and then we're going to get into styling.